So this next segment is something that has been my mantra for the past year. And it's one of these things that I think you can take away and do, right? So I'm hoping at the end of this next module, you all have a plan. So I know with my PhD team, I'll call out, AJ, what's my term of the year? Experimentation. I'm all about experimentation. Last year and this year, that's all, I'm at every meeting of my Jedi Council. It's like, okay, what experiments are we running? What are the results? What did we learn? What experiments are we running? So let's talk about experimentation. Disruption and innovation both require experimentation, fundamental experimentation. And I'm clear about this. If you're not disrupting your own company, someone else will. So at the beginning of every year, I'm asking myself, how would I disrupt my own company this year? Right? Is that a question you're asking yourself? From Singularity University, from Human Longevity, from XPRIZE, how would I be disrupting my own company? Now, it doesn't mean I need to do it every year, but it drives me to think in a way that is critically important as an entrepreneur. Because if you're running a successful company, probably hundreds of individuals, maybe 1,000 individuals are looking to disrupt your company because you're looking to enter that marketplace with a brand new set of technologies. You've seen them here on the Convergence Catalyzer. So let's talk about what experimentation is and why it's important. The companies that are crushing it, we're going to hear from Jeff Holden, who's a chief product officer, and Jeff is a dear friend and an amazing individual. Jeff was number 2 at Amazon. He came up with Amazon Prime. He's the chief product officer at Uber, and we did a webinar this past year, if you were a part of that, talking about experimentation at Uber, right? In the years, Uber, Google X, Amazon, these are companies that run 1,000+ experiments a year. And it's the realization that our opinion as humans really starts to matter less and less. And humans should be coming up with the plethora of ideas, but then running the experiments to find out if they're valid. So, what does that look like? I'm going to start with the notion that a true disruptive idea, the day before something is truly a breakthrough, it's a crazy idea. You've heard me say that before. I learned that from Burt Rutan. Right? The day before something is truly a breakthrough, it's a crazy idea. If it wasn't a crazy idea, it wouldn't be a breakthrough. It'd be an incremental improvement. So your job is to come up with crazy ideas, big, bold, crazy ideas. And then to run the experiments, to find out, is there any value in that? Would the customers like it? Is it really going to gravitate? Is it something that's of interest? And when you run those experiments, you collect data. And then based on that data, perhaps it's based on an algorithm, we can talk about that later, but based upon that data, you decide, yeah, there's something here. And we're going to go and create a new product because the data actually shows that people want that. And if it doesn't, you go and you try another crazy idea. It's very simple. The question is, how fast can you iterate that? And how many cycles do you try? You with me? I believe that your job as a CEO, as an entrepreneur, is to hire amazing people, put them into a great culture that doesn't fear failure, that celebrates experimentation, and then let them experiment rapidly. You do that, and I guarantee you massive success. Because great people in a culture that allows experimentation, we heard about a little bit with Beth Comstock, Don't say, Beth told me. You want people who are autonomous, who are thinkers for themselves, and are willing to experiment. And let them experiment and come up with product ideas, and if the data shows the customers want that, then you go and put forward. And I mentioned this, the day before something is a breakthrough, it's a crazy idea. So where do you get your crazy ideas? That's a really important question. Where do you get your crazy ideas? Yoga. I mean, they come at different times, And if you're a serial or parallel entrepreneur, many times they'll come from you. If you're a quick start, I don't think anybody quite the 10 quick start you are, Dan, but if you're a quick start. And for me, I keep on forgetting that the crazy ideas are not always going to come from me. I mean, here's a challenge, right? I am locked in to the way I think. I don't know how to think differently than the way I think. It's sort of a little twist of a mind puzzle, but it's right. I mean, I think the way I think, and I don't know how to think differently. So my crazy ideas come from three different things. One, it's from reading books, and when I'm reading a book, I'm having a conversation with that author. So my conversation with Ray Kurzweil gave birth to Singularity University. My conversation with Charles Lindbergh in his autobiography gave birth to the X Prize. With Robert Heinlein, the man who sold the moon, gave birth to Planetary Resources. So you can be inspired by a book, all right? Hopefully Bold or Abundance has worked that. You can have conversations with other people, right? And so finding people who are unlike you and having conversations in that diverse manner, and it's what Matt Ridley calls ideas having sex, right? Your ideas recombining and having sort of Darwinian evolution. And the third is, can you create a community of diverse individuals that help come up with crazy ideas that are valuable to you? And so there are a number of drivers for crazy ideas. And let me share them with you. And I'm going to give you a tool that I use in my organizations to drive innovation. The first driver is constraints. What do I mean by that? You've heard the term think out of the box. My goal for you is to think in a very small box. So if you have a team of people in your company and you say, I want you to be innovative, I want you to go do something amazing, I want you to go and create $1 billion opportunity, and you said to them, you have all the time, all the money, access to all the people you want, those individuals are going to follow their traditional ways of doing things and take all the time, take all the money, take all of that because they can. If you said to them instead, and this is what we do at the X Prize, if you said to them and said, no, you don't have that, you don't have 3 or 4 years, you have a month. You don't have, tens of millions of dollars, you've got $10,000. I'm making up crazy numbers here. And you have a group of 10. Go do something epic. What happens? Most of the people say it can't be done, and they opt out. Those who say, okay, I'll give it a try, what the hell, have to start with a clean sheet of paper. They realize that the way they've been doing it cannot possibly give you the results. So they have to try something crazy. It forces them into that different mind, like, how would we possibly do it? You with me on this? So constraints drive a brand new kind of creativity. A second thing that drives creativity is diversity of your team. And so when I think about diversity, I think it's about diversity of knowledge, diversity of background, diversity of size. And one of that includes what I call a youthful attitude. When JFK said, let's go to the moon in 1961, which was a crazy idea, right? We had never even launched a person to orbit in the United States. Gagarin, one human, had gone up to orbit. In 1961, he makes this challenge. We're going to go and land humans on the moon and bring them back safely before the end of the decade. The average age of the engineers who drove the creation of everything, the rendezvous and guidance, the navigation, the propulsion, the structures, was 26 to 30 years old. Because there was no one there to tell them how it could not be done. They had to make it up. Fast forward 30 years, the dot-com revolution, the average age of people driving the dot-com revolution was, 20 to 25. Now, I'm not being an ageist in this regard. My point is when some kid comes into your CEO suite with a crazy idea, your job is to listen. I want to point out Albert Einstein did his work when he was 26, John Lassalk at 30, James Watson at 25, Isaac Newton at 23, Marie Curie at 45, Galileo at 22. And this quote says, the young do not know enough to be prudent, and therefore they attempt the impossible and achieve it generation after generation. Now, you can keep yourself in a youthful mind state, and I define an expert as a guy or a gal who can tell you how exactly it can't be done, right? And you've seen, it can't be do it that way. So hopefully being back here every year is sort of keeping you, and keeps me sort of very humble and like, holy cow, I had no idea. And so it makes me realize there is nothing that we can't do. The third crazy idea driver is small groups. You see, big groups tend to go towards the norm. Big groups don't take risks. Small groups do, right? Microsoft, the Mac team, Google, over and over and over again. It's a small team of entrepreneurs who are willing to try something crazy. This is what Jeff Bezos calls the 2-pizza rule. Any team that you can't feed with 2 pizzas is too big. And it's true. I pride myself in the PhD Ventures team as 8 individuals. And it's just the right size to go and do stuff. So the takeaway here on driving crazy ideas are constraints, team composition, diversity, youthfulness, risk-philic, and small groups. So the question is, where in your organizations do you allow for a youthful naivete to generate these kinds of breakthroughs? And how do you create these small, diverse groups with the authority and resources to attack a problem? So what I'd like to share with you now is what a friend of mine, Michael Schrage at MIT, it's his idea. I simply am a fan of it, and I wrote about it in bold. It's called the 555 Project. And we're going to do this together. Let me explain what it is. First of all, why do people fear failure? Why does someone working on a project fear failure? What's some ideas? What's that? They lose their job, yes. What else? Invalidation. They're going to fear impact of their reputation. What else? I've been working on this project, and holy shit, if it fails, I'm out my reputation. I'm out 3 years of time, right? I've been in it for 3 years. I cannot afford to fail. And I'm into it for $10 million. I cannot afford to fail, right? So the major 3 things people fear failure is personal reputation, loss of the capital, loss of the time. So the 555 teams, here's the idea. In your organization, and you're going to do this right now. We're going to pull out a tool that's going to help you with this. You're going to create groups of 5 in your organization. In those groups, you want diversity. You want the person at the front desk and an engineer and a marketing person. You're going to give them a budget. It could be $50, $500, $5,000. You're going to give them a limited period of time, a constrained period of time. 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months. And then you're going to tell them how many experiments you want them to try. Could be 1 experiment, could be 5 experiments. You with me? Yep. So let's see how we take action here. Now, when you're giving your group this charter, right? You're breaking up your company into groups of 5, or your division, or a part of your group, or your executive team, or whatever it might be. You're going to say to them, listen, I'm not looking for average results. I'm not looking for anything incremental. I'm looking for the most exciting results possible. Failure is okay. I want you to, swing for the fences. And if it fails, if it's a crazy idea that doesn't work, that's okay. And then the best idea wins, and that team gets rewarded. But in fact, if one team wins, the entire organization is get rewarded, right? You're going to support collaboration between the teams. But small ideas don't cut it. So let me give you an example of one of the experiments we're running right now. So in my PhD team, including myself, we have 9 individuals. And you've got this worksheet. In fact, if you go and grab this worksheet, go ahead and pull this out right now so you can follow along with me. The next question it says is, if your team is less than 20 people, because I want at least four teams in your competition, how many more people can you secure? So I'm going to, outside of my PhD team, I'm going to secure another 11 outside individuals to be part of this experiment. And that means 20 total, so I'm going to have 4 teams total. With me? So it says your team should be diverse, gender, age, discipline, skill. If you don't have sufficient diversity or enough employees, where might you add team members and diversity? So I'm going to invite folks out of XPRIZE, out of SU, out of HeroX, my past employees. I'll allow PhD venture employees to bring a friend if they want. I want to get to 20 in this experiment. And for me, I'm going to give every team $500 to do their experiments. And I'm going to ask them to do 5 experiments. And I'm going to say you can do this over 5 weeks. This is nights, weekends, shower times, Fridays, whatever the case you want. I'm going to assign Sydney. Sydney, you have this. You're the lead on this. And my goal for them is I want them to find a scalable mechanism, campaigns or programs, to grow my current email list size from 110,000 to 250,000 in 6 months, which is hard. It's really hard. My list grows probably at about 1,000 people a month, so I'm asking it to go 10 times faster. So, are you with me? I'm very specific on what my goal is. It's like a number in a certain amount of time. And so the experiments that someone's running is going to have to show me that if they scale their experiment, it has the potential to hit those numbers. And if something only, increases our growth rate by 10%, not going to cut it for me. So I would like you guys now to we're going to give you 7 minutes. I want you to fill out this tool. I want you to pick something that you want to move the needle forward. This is an amazing team building across your organization and allows you to bring in diversity of thought that's very unusual. So Randy, maybe it's how we can use autonomous trucks, right? Or how we can compete against autonomous trucks. So let's put on the thinking music. Please be specific. You might want to fill out your experimental focus first, and then fill this tool out, and then we're gonna share it. Thank you. 7 minutes. I've used this at XPRIZE. I'm using this with PhD Ventures. I think this experimental idea of if you're looking for some kind of a stretch goal, trying to figure out how do you run 10, 20, 30, 50 experiments rapidly. And as a CEO, you don't need to know how to run the experiment. You just need to know what it is you're trying to achieve. Does that make sense? And then let your smart employees, many of which who are smarter than you actually know because you have them buttonholed in what they're doing, and they don't have actually the chance to show you what they can actually do. I mean, that's one of the things I'm amazed by my team is like, holy shit, how do you know how to do that? Well, they do. And this gives them the freedom to actually show off what they're able to do. So give your team the chance to amaze you. Next, it's my pleasure to bring onto stage two rock stars from Google Ventures who I've had the pleasure, specifically Jake Knapp, to know. Let me introduce Jake. Jake created Google Ventures' sprint process and is the author of a book called Sprint, which is the detailed how to run a sprint. He has run more than 100 sprints with startups such as 23andMe, Slack, Nest, Foundation Medicine. Previously, Jake worked at Google, leading sprints for everything from Gmail to Google X. He is currently among the world's tallest designers. Jake, why don't you come on out, and I'll introduce John next. Please welcome Jake Knapp. Thank you. Please welcome John, who has designed mobile apps, medical reports, and a daily newspaper, among other things. Before joining Google Ventures, he was a design lead at YouTube and an early employee of FeedBurner, which Google acquired in 2007. John has written about design and productivity for Wall Street Journal, Fast Companies, Wired, and Time. John, thank you for joining us. You're about to see so Google Ventures is one of the most extraordinary venture funds in the Valley. And one of the things that Google Ventures provides to the companies it invests in, besides capital, is the sprint process you're about to hear about from these two gentlemen. And so this is what one of the smartest companies believes is the way to rapidly experiment and make a difference on your products and services. Please pay careful attention. I'm so proud and happy to have Jake and John here. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Peter.
Give you that.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks. All right, you guys. Well, I'm going to get right into it here and tell you all about the design sprint process that we run. But I want to start at the very beginning with a little history, or at least my history with the design sprint process. This goes way back to the turn of the century, all the way to the year 2003. And it's sepia tones back then, as you can see. In 2003, I worked at Microsoft, and I worked on a product called the Encarta Encyclopedia. So I don't know if you guys remember that, but it was actually an encyclopedia on a CD-ROM. And if you don't remember what a CD-ROM was, it was like a little plate with reflective coating, and you could put information on it. And if you don't remember what an encyclopedia was, it was like Wikipedia, but we thought it was a big deal that you could access it on your computer. At that time, though, around the turn of the century, we were facing a lot of competition from this upstart company called Google and Wikipedia. So people were increasingly going online to run searches when they wanted to find something out, and it was fast and it was free, and we were losing market share year after year, and Encarta was in decline. And this is very frustrating for us because we believed, and actually I still believe, that our content was better, our articles were better, our photos and videos were better. But we just couldn't compete. I mean, free, as you know, is really tough to compete with. So we thought of a bunch of different ideas about things we could do to reinvigorate our product line. And we argued about which one we should do and anywhere. And we decided on this one idea. And we were going to sort of rebuild the product around this idea. And we worked on it. We built it and built it and built it. It took us about a year to engineer and design the product. And this is what we came up with. So by the end, it looked like this. You have to remember, this is a long time ago, but this was really sophisticated for the time, and it was a sort of a 3D interface that really highlighted our content, and it was much different than what you'd see if you went with your browser online to look at an article. So we were super excited about this. We put it on the CD, and we sent it off to manufacturing, and so we were all set. But we still had to sell it. And in order to sell it, we had to design the box, because in those days, there was no app stores. The app store was a store, and you would go to the store and you would look at the boxes, and you'd pick up a box and decide if you were going to buy the software and try it out. So if you were just logically trying to design this box, you'd probably put the name of the product on there and a big picture of this thing that we created, this new software, and you describe it in some way. But that's not what we did. And what happened was that at the very end of this product cycle, when we'd finished engineering it, we brought in a marketing team. And the marketing team, in turn, hired an outside agency, and they designed the box. And this is the box that they designed, and it's a fine box, but all of the work that the whole team had done for the whole year was encompassed in this one little line of text right here. In fact, it's 3 words in sort of 5-point font. It says "New Visual Browser," which is great if you know what a visual browser is, but, well, anyway. I don't need to tell you that Encarta is gone. We did not beat Wikipedia. We did not beat Google. And in fact, Encarta is so gone that if you search for Encarta on Google, the first result is Wikipedia. If you can see really well, it says Microsoft Encarta was a digital encyclopedia. So it's very sad. It's very sad. And it still bothers me. I can't help but wonder, though, if I could go back in time, and do it all over again, could I have changed the course of events? And one of the things I wonder about is, well, what would have happened if instead of bringing marketing in at the very last moment, well, what if we had involved them in the beginning? What if we had at least gotten them excited enough about what we were building that they put it on the box? Or if, they had a different view about what would be compelling to our customers, what if they had convinced the engineering team and that's what we had built instead? Maybe that would have been more successful. But I really wonder about all those ideas we had. And in particular, I wonder about the risky ones that we were afraid to try. One of the ideas that I always found intriguing, but it was just too scary to take on, was the idea of giving Encarta away. And what if you went to a Microsoft search engine and Encarta was just there for free? We believed our content was better than Wikipedia, and as you know, Microsoft for many years was struggling to keep up with Google or catch up in the search engine business. We just can't help but wondering, but anyway, it's all over now. It's all water under the bridge. In 2007, I left Microsoft and I went to go work at Google, and so I'm a bit of a traitor, but I was really interested in process by that time. I had started to notice this while at Microsoft, and I don't mean to throw Microsoft under the bus. It's common for companies to take a long time building products and not know whether they're successful until they launch. And it was 10 years ago, Google, it was just like the coolest place, and I couldn't wait to see how do they build products? What happens between idea and launch there? It's pretty much the exact same thing. I would spend a long time building something. The engineers would get really excited about it, bring in marketing at the end to try to get them to explain it to people, and then they would launch it. Sometimes it would be a little faster, and sometimes the engineers would get into something and they would just kind of go. They would just, and it didn't ever launch. And in fact, I was involved in a project like this we had this idea we could do video meetings in a web browser. And I worked with some other Googlers on this. We were talking about it. We would, debate it and discuss it. We'd try to find a home for it. We worked on it in 2007 and 2008 and 2009. And finally, one week in 2009, me and 2 other engineers who were into this product, we cleared our schedule and we got together. They worked in Stockholm, and we were in the Stockholm office in an interior room with no windows, and we cleared our calendars, and we said, let's build a prototype. So I designed this. It was just this really rough, mock-up of how it might work. And then the engineer, and this is him, in the big picture there with the headset, he coded up a really rough version of it so that it actually worked. You could have a video meeting. And we started using it on our team, and we started sharing it with other teams, and it stuck. And pretty soon, all of Google was using this to run their meetings. And eventually, this launched as Google Hangouts. But what was cool about that when I looked back afterwards was I thought about all those long arguments and those long slogs to build a product. And in that 1 week, we had done all of that. We'd gone through that whole cycle. I started to wonder if there was a way to create a formula that would reproduce the constraints of that week and allow us to have experiences like that again and again at Google on our product teams. And so I started to devote my full-time job to that effort. And I created what I called a design sprint. It's a little bit different than an agile sprint. It's a sprint with a very specific series of steps. And I experimented with it. I ran them around Google. From 2010 on, I was running them with different teams. And then in 2012, I left Google and went to go work at Google Ventures, where I thought to do these design sprints with the team there and with startups.
So at GV, as it's now known, our mission is to invest in great startups. And as Peter said, we then try to help those startups out. So we want to give them not just money, but we want to help them be really successful. And we're funded by Alphabet, but the companies that we invest in are not necessarily related to Alphabet or Google. So they're in all different kinds of industries. And we found that no matter what industry, if you run a startup, there's kind of this common challenge, which is that there's some business opportunity, something in the market, some reason you started that startup, or you could think of it as a project or a new line of business, but you don't quite know how to take advantage of that opportunity, right? You're back in the situation of having all these ideas, all these things that you could do, and you know that some of them are worth billions of dollars, right? Some of them are really good ideas. And you know that some of them are worth pennies on the dollar, right? They're basically worthless. And then there's a third set of ideas that are actively dangerous. So they're, for all the reasons that Peter mentioned in his previous segment on experimentation, they're going to take too long, they're going to cost too much money, they're going to cause irreparable damage to your reputation. These are the reasons that we don't experiment and we don't go after the ideas that we're scared of, the ideas that might be dangerous. So in Silicon Valley, there's this notion that you ought to test your ideas by trying to get data, right? It makes a lot of sense. And the way that's usually implemented is that you're going to build and launch sort of a minimal version of that product, and you're going to release it, and you're going to get market data, right? So you're going to get data from the real customers, the real market. And it's a very high-fidelity form of data. It's really good data, but there's a few big problems with this approach. The first is that building things takes way longer than we expect it's going to. So if you've ever tried to introduce a new product, even a new website or a new marketing campaign, you know that things always take longer than expected. And once they're out there, it's almost impossible to pull them back. So imagine you go through this loop and you find, you know, that idea wasn't so good after all. How do you unlaunch something? How do you take a product back from customers who are using it? So what we've tried to do over the last few years is compress that cycle down and focus it on the essence of getting data to test our ideas, getting data to evaluate our ideas, to find out which ones are those billion-dollar ideas and which ones are the worthless ideas. And that's how we use the sprint. So the sprint process, at its core, is building and testing a prototype in 5 days. And since Jake joined our team in 2012, we've really put this process through its paces. We've run sprints with more than 100 different companies in all sorts of different industries. And we've taken everything that we know about the process and we've put it into this book, the sprint book, which I see lots of copies of out there, which is really cool. And at the end of the book, there's actually a 15-page checklist. So it has literally hour-by-hour instructions. It's got information about what kind of snacks to buy, what sort of whiteboard markers to use. I mean, we are total nerds, so it's all in there. But today, we want to spend some time taking you through that process in brief, and then, perhaps more importantly, telling you a few stories about sprints that we've done.
Yes, as John said, we are nerds, we are dorks about the process, and it's partly because we think that that specificity really unlocks the potential to get things done. When you have 5 days and you have a big problem to solve, there's a tendency to, argue or, stare like a deer caught in the headlights, and this process helps teams move through. It all starts with a really big challenge, though. If you're going to ask a team to clear their schedule for a week, it has to be something important and worthwhile. We bring together a team. We like the team size to be between 5 and 7. And as Peter said, we like a diverse team with different skill sets. And then we're going to clear the schedule for the whole week for that team, get them all in the same place so that they can focus in an uninterrupted way and then go through all those steps. On Monday of the sprint, we are going to focus on building a map. And so basically we're asking ourselves the question, what's the greatest risk or opportunity for this project? What's the moment that we can test that's going to tell us if this has a chance of succeeding? You can imagine for the Encarta Encyclopedia, it might have been the moment when a customer took the box off the shelf in a store, or the moment when they ran a search online. We've got that real team together in the room, and I think it's an important note that this is the real team who's going to be working on the project afterwards. It's not a special creative team. It's not, just the designers or just the marketers or an outside agency who we've brought in. It's really the engineer, the marketer, the sales person, the folks from that team are working together to build this sort of vision for where they're going to head. And we go through a number of activities, and I'll just call out a few of them. One of them, it seems very obvious, but we want to make sure everybody understands the long-term goal, and we want a list of questions. Places where we think we might have risks, places where we think we might trip up, things that we think could cause this project to fail. And then we build a really high-level map. It shows the different customer types and the way that they move through the product. We use this map to pick a target. So we've got one specific customer segment we're going to focus on, and one place on the map where we think that risk and opportunity lies. That's where we're going to focus on solving and prototyping.
So after the first couple days of, the first day of understanding the problem, we want to come up with those ideas, those solutions that we're going to test at the end. And we don't do any group brainstorming in a sprint. We think that's a waste of time. Instead, what we do is have each person in the sprint work individually to capture their ideas on paper. We want people to take their ideas out of their heads, and ideas always sound better when they're in our heads, and put them down on paper in a concrete form that the rest of the team can see and think about and talk about and evaluate. And this is what those sketches look like. They're very detailed, and they're anonymous. You'll see on this sketch that there's words, there's boxes, there's some little doodles, but they're not works of art. These are sketches that anybody can create. Any of you in this room could create a sketch like this. And in fact, we've had customer support, CEOs, engineers, we've had literally everybody produce sketches that were not only smart and useful, but went on to become successful prototypes and executions for the sprint that we were working on. In a typical sprint, we're going to end up with 10 or more different competing solutions, and we can't put them all together into one prototype. It'd be a jumbled mess. So we have to narrow it down. We have to decide which of those ideas we're going to take forward and test with customers.
And again, decision-making is another one of these things that can be really hard without form and without structure, and so on Wednesday, we've got a lot of structure behind the process. We're trying to avoid groupthink. We're trying to avoid the team watering down their decision and coming to a consensus. And if you've ever been in a group of peers where people were trying to come up, democratically with a solution, you know all the things that can go wrong. So we've got a number of steps to try to evaluate all the ideas, to try to get the best of everyone's opinion, but not to water down the ultimate decision. We use a structured critique, and so we're going through, and it's quite fast. It's not literally this fast, but we're going through and looking at each of the sketches and getting everyone to talk about the ideas that they think work or don't work in those solutions. But at the end of our decision-making process, one person, the decider, is going to make the call and choose which solutions we prototype. That person might be someone who's in the sprint, but if it's a small company, but often it's a CEO or a vice president making a cameo appearance to make that call, which is very important for the long-term success of that product. After we've chosen the winning solutions, we'll piece those together into a storyboard, and that storyboard is our blueprint for the prototype that we're going to build. And if you've done the math, we only have 1 day left before our test on Friday to build that prototype.
Despite the insane deadline and the pressure, Thursday is a lot of fun because everybody's got a job. Everybody knows what they have to do. There's a plan. We've split up the work. There's that clear sense of urgency and that timing. And there's a little bit of suspense. People want to see if their idea turned out. They want to see how it works when they put it in front of customers. But we don't have to create a real product. We don't have to create a complete product or even a functional product. What we're aiming for is a realistic facade. So we want it to look real so that when customers see it in the test on Friday, they're reacting as they would if they were seeing something out in the wild. It's the equivalent of if they were standing in that aisle in Best Buy looking at the box on the shelf, or if they're in the App Store deciding whether to download this fitness app or that fitness app. So in this screenshot, you can see we sometimes use Keynote to make these prototypes. This is the same program we're using for this presentation, but we can make really simple mock-ups, and then we can pull them into tools like Marvel and InVision and Flinto, and make apps that are stitched together with hotspots that look and feel like real apps without doing any coding. And these are real examples of things we've done in 1 day of prototyping. We can include video and audio. Here's an example showing that process I talked about where it looks like you're installing it from the App Store, so you're kind of simulating that shopping process because your product experience doesn't just start when you open the app for the first time. It starts the moment you hear about it and you go through that process of deciding whether you want to install it. Sometimes these things are actually physical prototypes. They're not always apps and websites. When we were working with Blue Bottle Coffee, we wanted to test some ideas around how to package and present coffee that would be sent to subscribers at home. So we printed up fake labels and fake logos and all sorts of different ways of presenting and packaging the coffee. We can use a 3D printer. We used this recently when we were doing a sprint with a medical device company to sort of work on the form of the device, how it would feel to wear it, what it would be like to set that up. And sometimes there's no product at all. It's actually a prototype of a service that's going to be provided to customers. One of our portfolio companies is One Medical Group, which is a network of primary care clinics. And they were considering expanding from just treating adults to treating children as well. And they wanted to see how that would go and what the risks were involved in doing that. So we took one of their offices and we closed it for the day. And we converted it into an office for children, for family care. We made a few physical modifications to the space. We added some snacks. We added some toys for the kids to play with while they waited. And then we actually wrote a script. So we kind of changed the way that the staff there behaved, the doctors, the nurse, the people at the front desk. How did they speak to the kids and how did they speak to their parents as they were going through that experience? Sometimes we can do a prototype and test an idea before there's any product at all. And we'll often do a prototype of a sales deck. It's literally just a PowerPoint presentation that a sales team can take into a meeting with a potential customer or client. And the conversation they can have is much more real. It's much more authentic than if they were just sort of having an abstract conversation about what they might do.
This idea of building a prototype that is just the facade that you can throw away is kind of an unfair advantage that teams who do sprints have over the normal way of doing things. And we live in this kind of golden age of prototyping with the kinds of software tools John showed with 3D printers. It's possible to build things that appear real without any special fancy skills and to do it much, much faster. It's not comfortable for most teams to spend time building something that they're going to immediately throw away. But if you cap it to a day, it's both possible and somewhat manageable to throw it away in case it fails. And that's what we'll find out on Friday, is whether it succeeds or fails. Friday's the day that we run our test. Our tests consist of one-on-one interviews, which is a very simple and, when we get to the Q&A, some of you may have questions about why we do it in this way, but we found it to be an exceedingly effective and exceedingly fast way to gather some qualitative data that tells us why things are working or don't working. So one person from our team is interviewing one target customer, and we're going to do that 5 times throughout the day on Friday. Meanwhile, the rest of the team is in another room watching over video and taking notes as the interviews go on. By the end of the day, we've got notes on 5 different customer reactions to our realistic prototypes, and the team can see patterns. If you'll see 3 people had this reaction, 4 people had this reaction, this part worked well, this part didn't work. It's actually kind of magically clear how obvious those patterns kind of jump out. And a team can then look back to their sprint questions, and they'll have answers. They'll know this part works, this part doesn't work. There's clarity about what to do next. We often say it's a little bit cheesy, but it's kind of like getting into a time machine and going forward in time to a date when your product is already launched, watching customers react to it in the stores, and then going back to the present day and sort of telling yourself, okay, here's what we should do because this thing isn't going to work, or perhaps it's actually that crazy idea is promising. So as John said, we've done a lot of these sprints, and we thought it might be useful to show you a few real stories so you could get a sense of what they're like in practice.
Yeah, the first example is Orbital Insight, and I flashed an example of their prototype on the screen earlier. But what Orbital Insight does is they buy photos and data from satellite providers, and then they sort of crunch and analyze that data and spit out really interesting conclusions or insights. So one of the examples of things they can do is they can count the number of cars in the parking lot of a big box store. So say a Home Depot. You can see how many people are shopping at a Home Depot, which is really useful information if you're an investor buying or selling Home Depot stock, for example. So it gives investors and people who are looking for that type of insight an advantage. But they were considering launching a new product, basically a subscription offering that they were going to sell to hedge funds. It was going to be at a very, very high price point, much higher than anything they had done previously. And quite frankly, they were worried. They were scared. They were afraid. This was a big bet. And they wanted to find a way to sort of de-risk that bet and validate their assumptions about what their customers wanted. So in the sprint with Orbital Insight, the course of the prototype that we created and the test that we did was actually creating that sales deck. So we had the sales team there with us, we had the leadership of the company, we had the engineers from that company talking about what they imagined that product would look like, that new offering that they had in mind, what they imagined that would look like, creating just enough renderings and examples of that we could create a really realistic sales prototype or sales deck, and then the sales team took that and used that in their conversations with customers. And they were able to learn a lot about what was likely to work or not work, and what was likely to sell or not sell, more importantly. The next story I want to tell you is about a sprint that we did with Slack. So those of you who aren't familiar, Slack is a tool for communicating and collaborating with your team online. And at the time we invested in Slack, the company was doing great. They had really, really great growth. Somewhere around this time, I think they were declared the fastest growing business app of all time by the New York Times, right? So amazing growth, amazing trajectory. And our investment was part of basically a double down, sort of like, okay, that growth is phenomenal so far. Let's see if we can expand on that and keep that line going in that direction. And to do that, they knew they needed to reach outside of their existing sort of comfortable customer base, which was other tech companies. It was people who sort of intrinsically understood the value of Slack, which is sort of just a really fancy chat room. So they had to reach other kinds of companies. And they decided the way to do that would be to launch a national advertising campaign. So they were going to put up billboards, they were going to do radio ads, they were going to hang banners in the airports, they were going to try to reach potential customers all over the United States. I was actually in Milwaukee, Wisconsin last summer visiting family. I saw one of these ads on the side of a bus. So I was like, wow, okay, they're really taking this seriously. They're trying to reach outside of the Silicon Valley tech bubble and find all kinds of customers. So imagine for a second that you're riding a bus in Milwaukee, or maybe you're driving this white pickup truck and you see this ad and you think 48% less email, that is pretty great, but what the hell is Slack? Never heard of this thing before. How does it work? What does it do? So hopefully you go to slack.com, and at that point, the website has a very hard job to do because it has to not only tell you what Slack is and explain it to you, but it has to convince you to try it and try it with your team. Because using Slack by yourself is not very interesting or useful. You need to kind of put yourself out there and convince the rest of your team to sign up with you. And that was the challenge that we were trying to solve when we did our sprint with them. Coming into the sprint, we had the team had one really strong idea that we called Bot Team. The idea behind Bot Team was that there would be literally a team of software bots, so little pieces of software that sort of pretended to be real humans, and you would sign in and you would join this team, and you'd basically get a simulation of what it would be like to use Slack. It's kind of like playing a video game of work, so you're kind of getting a feel for it before you commit. And the team was excited about this idea. It was the CEO's favorite idea, but they knew it was going to be hard. It was going to take a lot of time and effort to build. The technical part of it in particular was going to be really challenging. So they wanted to kind of test that and validate that before they moved forward in the sprint. During the sprint, we came up with a different idea that honestly was kind of embarrassingly simple. It seemed a little bit obvious, but it was the idea of a guide. It was essentially a tour, step-by-step tour of the product showing here's where you type a message, here's where you do a search, and so on. So we took these two ideas in the sprint, we converted them into realistic prototypes, we gave them fake brand names, and we tested these two ideas head-to-head in something that we call a rumble. This is our name for when we take multiple prototypes in a sprint and we let them compete. This is something that's very, very hard to do outside of the sprint context. Imagine you have two ideas for a product, and you can't just launch them both. It's just unrealistic. There's this sense that you need to sort of commit. But in a sprint, we can keep these competing ideas alive and pit them head to head. So that's exactly what we did. We tested with customers, and we found out that Bot Team was really confusing, actually. Maybe it doesn't sound like that much fun to play a video game of work, so maybe it's obvious in hindsight, but that was an important failure, an important early failure. The team wasn't bummed, though. They weren't disappointed. They saw it like they had dodged a bullet. They saw it as if they had, avoided wasting a lot of time, wasting a lot of money on something that was unlikely to be successful. And as a silver lining, they found that the guide worked really well. So they had a simpler, cheaper, easier solution for explaining the product that was also much more likely to be successful. So they launched it. In fact, if you go to slack.com today, you'll find the tour, the guide, and it worked. So that impressive-looking chart that I showed you earlier was actually just the beginning of this much more impressive chart. And so everything to the right of there was after the sprint. And of course, we can't take credit for that growth. There are countless things that Slack has done right to enable that to happen. But the sprint allowed the team to discover a new way of explaining the product that they were really confident was going to work with their customers, and they avoided wasting a lot of time and a lot of money on an unsuccessful solution. So I'll turn it back over to Jake. We're going to wrap up with one more story about a sprint that we've done.
Yeah, this is kind of an unusual story, but it might illustrate some different ways that you can build a prototype. This is a story about a company called Savioke, and Savioke makes a hotel delivery robot. So the robot is about this tall, and I don't believe they have it here at the Beverly Wilshire, so if you haven't seen it yet, it's about this tall and it has a little hatch on the top, a little locker in it. And you can put, if you're at the front desk, you can put a toothbrush, a towel, anything that a guest up in a room needs, close the top of the lid, type in the room number, and the robot will, on its own, it's like a little self-driving car, drive over to the elevator, wirelessly call the elevator, it'll get on the elevator and like ride it with people, and then when it gets to the, say the third floor, the door's open, it carefully gets off, not hitting anybody, goes to the room door, triggers a phone call and says, your delivery is here, and when the door opens, the hatch opens and the delivery is made. So for a smaller hotel or a hotel that doesn't have like a lot of staff, this is a really great way to handle rush times. Savioke had done a lot of the initial engineering work to build this robot. They had a fully functioning prototype of the robot, but they had a really big question. They were wondering how this robot should behave around people. And this may sound like sort of an obvious question, but they thought this was pretty critical. They're a young startup. They are building a hardware device that has a lot of capital required to get it right and to get it out into hotels. And they knew that once this robot was out in hotels, there was going to be a lot of press attention. People were going to be writing reviews about the hotel based on their experience with the robot, and they could not afford to get it wrong. If people didn't like the robot, if people were annoyed or irritated by the robot or frustrated, then they might not ever get any orders, and they might be sunk before they ever started the company in earnest. This is kind of the doomsday scenario that you can imagine, and it may sound sort of hyperbolic, and certainly this level of interest probably wouldn't come from a hotel robot, but certainly there's a problem that these folks had seen because they'd been in robotics for years and years, and they said, we are all spoiled by science fiction. We think that robots are like, Wall-E and C-3PO. We think they have, thoughts and plans and hopes and dreams. And the reality is this robot cannot have a conversation with you. It's not going to be able to talk to you. And people are going to try to talk to it if it has a personality, if it has a face. They're going to try to speak to it, give it instructions. They're going to be disappointed, frustrated, angry, and we just can't afford it. So the safe thing to do was to give the robot no personality. But they still wondered, and they saw a sprint as a way to test that risky idea in the safety of a 5-person test. So they took a week, and they ran a sprint. John and I got to run the sprint with them, so you'll see us in some of these photos. On Monday, they brought the robot in, and we ran the sprint at our office at Google Ventures, and you can see them here kind of smuggling it in under a tablecloth as though a ghost would be less conspicuous than a robot on the Google campus. So they brought it inside, and we were smitten immediately. This is a selfie we took with the robot right away. But the Savioke team had the real team in the room. So we talked about this earlier. It's not just the designers, it's not a special team, it's a representative team. And at a small startup, it's really like kind of everyone in the room. This is our map from the first day, and Steve, the CEO of Savioke, decided that of all the places where a guest might encounter the robot for the first time, the most important test of its personality was the moment of delivery. So if you're in the room and you do not know a robot's going to show up at your door, and you open the door and there's a robot there, we really better get that right. And so that's what we decided to focus on for the week. So on Tuesday, the whole team sketches, and this is a little video from it, and just as you saw earlier, it's kind of boring looking. Everybody's quietly working, creating their own independent vision for how to solve that problem. What's the best personality we can give this robot? And we had many different competing solutions, And as usual on Wednesday, we ran our decision-making process. Steve chose 3 ideas that he wanted to try, 3 ideas that he felt like were risky but had the potential to pay off. The first idea was that the robot might play games. If people enjoyed interacting with the robot, perhaps they'd like to play follow the leader or hide and seek with the robot. And so that was idea number 1. Idea number 2, give the robot a face. Sounds very obvious, but it is the thing that most suggests that the robot might be able to talk, so they actually considered it a big risk. And idea number 3, have the robot do a happy dance at the end of the delivery. This is actually an idea submitted by my colleague John here, and I would like to go on the record as saying that I thought this was a very stupid idea, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. So on Thursday, we built the prototype. We have 8 hours to modify their robot so that it's got this personality, and we split up the work. So they've got somebody who's working on sound effects. Here's John working with another of our colleagues to design the face. Again, just using Keynote software, putting that Keynote presentation on an iPad mini. They popped the front panel off of the prototype robot, stuck the iPad on there, and it appeared as though the robot had a little face and a little speech bubble. Normally, the robot drives on its own, but here Tessa, the CTO, is using a PlayStation remote. This is a manual override mode. We only had to make 5 deliveries and do 5 happy dances, so she could do all of that with the remote. No need to actually program the robot unless it worked. On Friday, we ran the test with guests. So we thought it was really important to do this at the hotel to make it as realistic as possible. Our colleague Michael, who often runs these interviews, came down. This is a picture of him in front of the hotel. He came inside early in the morning with his suitcase, and in his suitcase, he's got all kinds of stuff. He's got drop cams and tripods and extension cords and duct tape. And basically, with the help of the Savio team, he rigged the hotel room so it was like a makeshift research lab. And there's cameras everywhere. I'm pretty sure we cleared this with the hotel. And we would be able to see what happened as the robot made the delivery. We'd be able to watch from all angles how customers reacted. So at 9 a.m., the first customer shows up. And just for a second, put yourself in the shoes of this person. Earlier in the week, you responded to an ad on Craigslist. And it said, hey, there's these usability interviews in Cupertino on Friday. And if you have free time, and you're thinking, well, yeah, I do have some free time. Sure, I'll check this out. And so you fill out a form, you answer a few questions, and you get an email back from Michael. And it says, hey, I know this was a little unusual, but this interview is going to be in a hotel room. And this is you on Wednesday, and yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I always commit to things in the future that I later regret. So you're thinking like, yeah, this will be fine, and now it's Friday, and you're actually in the lobby, and Michael shows up, and he says, come with me, and you're in the elevator with Michael, and then you're in his room, and then there's cameras everywhere, and I highlight this because, partly because it is kind of funny, but also partly because this notion of going out and talking to our customers when the product is not ready, when the product is not finished, is scary and uncomfortable. And we often skip doing this kind of testing because we can convince ourselves that talking to customers one-on-one is too small of a sample size. And we can convince ourselves that it's a much better use of our time to be at our desks, in meetings, discussing what's the best idea, doing large-scale market research, or writing code. All of those things are very easy to convince ourselves of because that's what we're comfortable doing. This one-on-one conversation that Michael's having here is not comfortable, but it unlocks a lot of very fast learning. So Michael does some things to make this work, and we talk about it in the book, but he writes an interview guide. He has a specific arc he's going to follow in the interview so that he doesn't have to make up the conversation from scratch. He knows he's going to answer the key questions that we've got to learn. And he's got his badge on, so they'll know he is who he said he would be. And meanwhile, we get to watch. So with the Savio team is watching over this closed-circuit video, they're able to see how the customer reacts. And Michael prompts them to call the front desk and say, you forgot your toothbrush. And so, the person calls and says, I forgot my toothbrush. And somebody from Savio who answered the phone says, we'll send one right up. And we watch as the robot moves into position and Tessa's driving it. And there's, the person calls back and says, your delivery is here in kind of a robotic voice. And the person goes over to the door and opens it. And then lo and behold, there's the robot. And we get to watch 5 times what happens when the robot makes that delivery and when that personality with all those risky ideas is put to the test. So what happened in those 5 tests was that we learned that no one wanted to play games with the robot. No hide and seek, no follow the leader. But the face was actually successful. It turns out that if you make the face not too intelligent looking, people won't talk to it. And so that was a coup. That was a big success. It also, I have to admit that the dance was a big success. And you have to understand that the robot just, it doesn't have arms. So it's just sort of pivoting like this, which is actually how I've seen John dance. It's actually, it's actually accurate. But it works for John and it worked for the robot too. You're going to see here what it looks like when the robot makes a delivery. And there's the dance. It's just like John at a party. So they launched, and their press and their reviews were great. In fact, they highlighted the personality of the robot. And in fact, they're now sort of building robots as fast as they can. They've got so many orders, which is fantastic. But obviously, this is a weird kind of a story, and you guys are hopefully, you're not all in the hotel robot business, or there's going to be too much saturation in the market. But the big underlying thing here is that building and launching something, we all know this is slow, and we all know that the risk at the end is great, and you lose a lot of time when you operate in this way. What's important to keep in mind is that unless you're very careful, this loop can take just as long, or sometimes even longer. So the idea with the sprint is to shorten that cycle, to make it fast, and to try riskier ideas. We believe that the companies we invest in are going to be more successful if they take big risks, and I'm sure the same is true for companies of all sizes like you all run. Leave you with this clip. This looks like a stock video of people working. This is actually people in a sprint. It's really a fun way to work, and when you try a sprint on your team, you're going to be giving your colleagues, your employees, yourself a gift, because it's a chance to focus on what's most important for a week and to do it in a way that brings everybody's best skills to the table. So check out the book. I know, Peter, you have maybe an announcement about that.
Yeah, well, obviously we've bought a copy of their book for all of you. So you've got this book with amazing stories and a DIY guide. But more importantly, I mean, what amazing insights, right? I mean, to have these guys that run these sprints for Google Ventures top companies to come here and share with you how they do it, what they've done. It's an unfair advantage. You guys appreciate. Please thank Jake and John.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
So we're going to do two things. One, we're going to ask you actually to figure out what sprint you actually want to run when you go back home. And then we're going to do a Q&A panel with the group so you can ask them questions. Right? I'm very proud. We worked with Jake to run a sprint at PhD Ventures on an idea that we killed as a result of the sprint. Saved a lot of time, a lot of money. So in your experimentation tab, you have this experimentation tool that we created with Jake and John. And I'm going to show you how I filled it out to give you an example. The example is in there as well. It says, where is the greatest risk or opportunity in your business for 2017? So what I wrote down is digitizing and packaging my library of online content, videos, Q&As, and articles. So I have a massive amount of content I've created over the last 10 years, and it sits there fallow. How do I actually digitize and package it? So write down 3 sprint ideas. Which existing products or services can you improve? Which new features would you like customer feedback on before launching? So my first idea is about a digital community on-ramp for A360 members. Can we create that? The second is creating an A360 community application to help you guys meet each other better. My third idea was a virtual keynote offering. So I spend a hell of a lot of time on aluminum tubes flying around the world to give 1-hour keynotes on stage, which slay me from my free time approach. And so can I create a great virtual keynote experience where I can come in through an avatar, through VR, through whatever the case might be? So I wrote down those 3 as 3 areas I want to explore. And then I ask you to go through and rank them on, number one, does your sprint idea address a specific problem or opportunity? On a 1 through 10, how big a problem or how big an opportunity is it? And then, will the result of the sprint provide new information that will change your core product or service? So I went through and I ranked these, and for me, what came out was a digital community on-ramp for A360 members. AJ Scaramucci is running that. We're going to get organized over the course of 30 days, and the last 5 days of that will be running a sprint. So I encourage you to take, we have 7 minutes on the clock. Please fill out that form. What are 3 ideas, 3 products, or 3 improvements to your current product that you want to look at? Is it how you attract customers? Is it how you report out to customers? Is it a new variation on a product or a service you've been thinking about? Where would you like to run a sprint in your company? 7 minutes. This is your chance to ask them questions about how to execute sprints. Right? I remember I first met Jake at TED, I just missed you at the TED Google Ventures dinner, and I was like trying to chase you down, and it's like, it's the tall guy over there. And I called you up afterwards, and luckily,
fast walker, so
luckily you knew who I was, and I'm so thankful for the incredible support you and John have given me and my team, and I'm just passionate about helping entrepreneurs really experiment and make their dreams come true. So let's go to the microphones. Mark, kick us off, pal. You, on the right side over here.
Just a quick question for you. I love the concept, and I understand it as a method for de-risking and a way to sort of narrow down the options. But what are your views about the role of traditional market research for those of us who are kind of old school? How does the sprint process fit with traditional market research, market development, and so forth?
Yeah, one of the ways that we'll often use more traditional market research, or really any other kind of research or validation, will be as an input to the sprint. And we'll, in fact, on Monday afternoon, we have a section we call Ask the Experts, where we'll bring in experts either from the team or from outside the team, perhaps a researcher who ran a study or conducted a survey. That person will come in and sort of report to us, and it'll be a chance for the rest of the team to try to glean as much knowledge from that research as possible. We think that the sprint works really well in environments where there's a lot of uncertainty and there's a really high cost to ultimately executing on whatever solution you come up with, and anytime you need to know why something is working or not working. So it's a really nice complement to more traditional types of research.
Thanks, Mark. Let's go to Juan over here.
Just wanted to comment how amazing this methodology is. We use it to build strategy at my businesses, and we've replaced the old way of building, waterfall strategy, and rather build emerging strategy now with doing sprints in every team in the company.
What business are you in, Juan?
We have real estate, financial services, and different businesses in different industries, and it works awesome in any industry of the ones that we run them in. But had specific question of, in real estate, do you have any tips of perfecting the sprint? Have you had experiences in real estate that you can share?
Well, first of all, thank you, audience plant. No, that's a great question. We appreciate hearing that. It's really awesome. I think we've actually only run one sprint with a company who is doing real estate, and I don't have any amazing insights from that. I will say, and this is sort of a general answer to these kinds of questions, that we started doing sprints. I started doing the sprint process at Google thinking this is something for consumer software. This will work if your target audience is sort of straight down the middle software user. It's a regular product that people are going to find out about in an app store kind of thing. And at Google Ventures was really challenged by our investments in life science, healthcare companies, farming tech companies, coffee companies, this variety of different kinds of customer, that the same basic formula worked. We kept trying to apply the same formula. It seems as you've found, the same formula will work as long as you are really critical about recruiting the right kinds of customers and defining who your target customer is. And finding, you have to often be quite inventive and imaginative in figuring out how you're going to prototype that key moment. And I don't know, would be curious to hear, we should talk after about how you've done that with real estate, but some of those key experiences happen offline. They don't happen with a screen, and that's often the place where it takes, more thinking to figure out how you're going to do it, but the process will still work.
Peter said earlier that your team is smarter than you think they are. It's also the case that they're more clever and more resourceful than you think they are. So we've been amazed. We're like, how the hell are we going to prototype a robot in one day? And the team's like, oh, no problem. We've got ways of doing this. We can remove the screen. And so I think whatever field you're in, your team probably already has the skills and knowledge that they need to.
Honestly, how many folks here really realize that they underestimate the inherent intelligence in their team, in their organization? And so if that's the case, which it is for me, throw them the challenges. Let them experiment. Let them try stuff. You're underutilizing the single most important resource you have in your organization, which is the minds of your people.
That's right.
Steve.
Amazing work, guys, and helpful. I'm curious, going a little bit deeper, you've done enough of these. What are the critical success factors or the critical failure factors that you find about the teams or the problems that you have attempted this method with?
Yeah, some of the things that cause sprints to not go well, we don't have the decision maker in the sprint, or we don't have the real decision maker. Sometimes the true decision maker will sort of delegate and say, oh, yeah, you can make the decisions in the sprint, but it's not the same thing as the person who's ultimately going to write the check. Not choosing a large enough challenge. 5 days, 10 to 5 is our daily schedule. That's a big commitment of time. You multiply that by 7 people, and it's definitely not trivial, and we don't want to make it sound like it's a trivial commitment. So we find that the teams that take on a really big challenge, they're all in. It's the sort of thing where they feel like, all right, we got to figure this out. Let's clear the schedule and get down to work. So those are two of them.
Yeah, the other one that I'd mention is cutting the sprint short. I think it's 5 days it's a big commitment, but it's also very fast, and people often say, we'd like to do it even faster. Let's do it in 2 days. Let's do it in 3 days. And the thing that often happens is if you cut it short, you're not going to be able to build a prototype and test it with your customers, which is ultimately the most important part. So many Wednesdays in our experience, we've been so confident that we had a brilliant idea on our hands, the bot team or whatever it might be that week, and enthusiastically built our prototype, shown it to customers, and really had our perspective turned around. And when teams stop on Wednesday or stop after 2 or 3 days with that excitement, it's maybe the road to ruin. So we often tell people, you've got to go all the way through, you've got to finish that test.
Yeah.
Next question, please.
Hi. Any ideas for a engineering company that makes big things like power plants that can't go wrong? How do you, and they've got very low profit margins, they're making money from having the guys' butts in their seats from 8 to 5, and everybody's siloed and has their own budget and doesn't want to give anybody up for 5 days to go and do something like this, yet those are the companies that are going to get very disrupted and need to be doing some sort of experimentation. Any ideas as to what they could be doing?
Yeah, I think these things always have to start with the seed of seeing an opportunity or a risk. So that risk or opportunity has to be identified ahead of time. It doesn't happen within the framework of a sprint. But what I would imagine in the kind of scenario you're describing is that you've got a leader who sees this is a place where we're at risk, or this is a place where we can do something big. And you're going to have to find that contact point. We often talk about the place where ideas succeed and fail is when they come into contact with humans, when they're exposed to oxygen. Humans are the most, unpredictable part of any equation. And when we're in our conference rooms or at our desks and we're imagining how our customers are going to react to whatever it is that we do that's different, we just can't do it. We can't simulate that world in our brain. We've got to show it to people. And so if it's a power plant, I don't know a lot about power plants, to be frank, but I could imagine that that point of contact might be the utility bill, or it might be actually the way that the power plant workers, what they do when they start their day in the morning. It might be a morning email or a paper that's on their desk.
Some sort of report that gets generated on a regular basis that is essentially kind of the interface to that plant.
It's trying to find that point between the idea, the new way, the new thing that we might do that's vague, and where it's going to come encounter with people.
It also needs a top-down. One of the things that Sprint and these guys have is the imprimatur of Google and the fact that Google's using this for their top investments. And if it's good enough for them, for God's sakes, it needs to be good enough for us. But it needs to come in at the CEO or the divisional head, the person who has the ability to say, you 5, this is what you're doing this week. And if it can't, then the organization deserves to go away. I don't have to be more serious than that. Please.
Yeah, James again from Melbourne, Australia. A couple of quick ones. Amazing work. We've been starting, but we started about 6 months ago, and it's just completely has such a huge impact on our culture, and it's just, everyone's really excited, and it's awesome. I've already replied. I've sent you an email, so there you go.
Wow.
So a couple of questions, and you can take it offline because I don't want any disrespect. We just had a whole bunch of people out on maternity leave, and we had a whole bunch of processes started with customer data and a whole bunch of stack of data and feedback. So 2 questions, and you can say no because I don't want to confuse anyone else. But we've actually changed or had to modify because of external forces 2 things. The first one is the ideas actually came from our patients and customers. So we started with all their ideas and we ranked them and weighed them up, and we just went in that completely agnostically. So the ideas didn't come from us. I don't know if that's too far off the process. And the second thing is, because of maternity leave and some just logistical stuff we couldn't get around, we decided that Thursday was our sprint day and we were going to run it over 5 weeks. So is that too much of to keep the purist, the intent, the results that go with just following it like a recipe?
I'll tackle the first part, which is sort of leaning on your customers or some other stakeholders to provide ideas, which I think is great. I think that it undervalues your team. They're the professionals at doing whatever they're doing. That's their job. They're the experts. And I think that when we've seen ideas sort of get submitted from kind of a crowd, those tend to be more superficial ideas. And so I think it's good to do, and it can have other advantages. It makes those people feel included or feel special or whatever. But I would be worried that those are not the very best ideas.
And so we started a second sprint internally that we used our own ideas for.
Cool.
Because we looked at the first one and said, oh my God, this is so crazy.
Do you have any thoughts on the Thursday thing?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We've heard of there's a program at Columbia University where they're trying to teach sprints. The way the class schedule works is very difficult for them to do sprints and teach the students in one solid chunk. And so they have been doing it one day a week, over the course of a semester. Same thing at Stanford. Columbia just recently introduced a new class where they're doing it in between semesters as a week-long thing. But outside of universities, I don't think we have examples of that. So I don't know for sure. The thing that we've often seen in our own work is that when we divide a sprint over a couple of weeks, the challenge starts to become loss of context, things dropping out of short-term memory. They drop out of RAM. And one of the big advantages of the sprint is that you're in it. Everything's fresh, everything's on the walls, everything's right there. So you'll have to probably work extra hard to reboot those things and preserve it. And if you can find a way to do it, I applaud it. I would love to hear what hacks you make to make it work, because the 5 days is a big challenge for a lot of teams.
Great, thanks so much.
Thank you.
So, very good. We're going to go to the right over here, Johnny. But so let me just ask you guys 1 second real quick. I showed the 555, and as we were pre-briefing for this, one of the things, the realization is there is an overlap between the 555 plan And you can imagine within the, a team running a 5-5-5 can actually, if you've got, 25 people in your organization and there are 5 teams, they can be running sprints during their 5-5-5 period.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an excellent way to start anything that's big, and especially if it's fuzzy, if you're trying to come up with an innovative idea, that's a lot of pressure. And the sprint gives you a recipe to start, which is great. It's also pretty cheap, which is also nice.
Amazing. Please.
All right. So I think that this methodology is brilliant, so thank you guys so much for sharing it with us. The question I have is that you guys probably interacted with a lot of startup folks that have exited from a company and are trying to build something brand new. So how would you modify, or how have you modified this methodology for people that are looking to build something brand new rather than upgrade their existing business?
One of the big things we do when we're starting from scratch in that sense, and you'll usually have, especially if you've got a repeat founder, they'll have an idea. They already have a kernel of an idea, but we really like to test the marketing, the moment when a customer first encounters the product. And it can be tempting just to take the most simple example, let's say that a founder has got an idea for an iPhone app. And it's tempting to dive in and start thinking about how that app is going to work and how the infrastructure behind that app is going to work and the network. But what's interesting to do in a sprint is to test the moment when a customer encounters it, in the App Store or in a review online somewhere, and how she understands what it is, how she decides whether it's something that she wants to try or not, how she thinks through that process. The first couple of screens, when you first open the app, what happens there? It's kind of that tip of the iceberg. It's that first moment of contact that we'll often try to simulate when a company is early on. And marketing, we found, and we alluded to it in the talk, is a crucial way to understand whether an idea is going to work, whether you can tell that story to a potential customer.
I remember working with Chad Hurley after he left YouTube and he started his incubator called Avos. He had a lot of different ideas that he was considering, and so he was literally starting from scratch, starting over as a repeat entrepreneur. And we did a sprint on one of his ideas where by the end of, I think we did 2 sprints, so it was a 2-week chunk. By the end of those 2 weeks, he had decided not to pursue that idea. So, something that is another common outcome where it's a failure, but it's a failure in the sense that you've saved yourself from a lot of toil.
So we'll go to James next, but let me just ask an interim question here that I think is important. The idea of doing iterative sprints, right? So I've done a sprint, I've tested something, it failed.
Yeah.
Can I do a mini sprint by varying a few parameters based on what I learned?
Absolutely. So the most successful teams do kind of these bursts of 2 to 4 sprints in a row, starting from the sort of the kernel of a big goal, a new product idea, a new market, a new marketing campaign. And the first sprint is always 5 days. And then you'll find that depending on the nature of what worked well or what failed in the test, it doesn't take you another full 5 days. It takes you maybe a couple of days. You can't cut short the testing and you can't cut short the prototyping, but you do maybe 1 day to come up with some fresh ideas. You update the prototype, you go back to the well sort of and find 5 more customers, you test it again. And the teams that routinely do that burst of 2 to 4 sprints every quarter or every time they're starting a new initiative are just amazingly successful with the process.
By the way, please be filling out your bold insights. As you're hearing this, what are the actions you're going to take, right? Very, very serious about this. Is there a person at your organization you're going to give this book to when you get home? You're going to forward a connection. You're going to forward Jake's email to. You're going to give them the handed out the sheet you just filled out. Are you prepared to go back and run a sprint inside your organization tomorrow? Get this kind of iterative experimentation mindset embedded in your organization, running a 5-5-5. James.
Great, thanks, Peter. I saw the webinar you did, Peter, with Jake, and it truly inspired me. And so, a big fan of Action Experiment, and the next week tried to do it. So, in a sort of pre-revenue startup, which means pretty much just me by myself. The question around, I have already emailed you. I've emailed you, by the way. So it's I got to about Monday lunchtime, and then basically that was it. It's quite hard to keep, like, I guess the question is, what's the minimum number of people, and how have you seen it work in sort of smaller groups of people? And
yeah, well, one thing, I mean, not to get too much into me, but I'm a big-time procrastinator, and a lot of the sprint structure is, I think it works well because I had to dissect what would force me to do work. And a lot of it is peer pressure. If I say, like, we're doing this sprint, we're all in the room together, we're all agreed to do this, that helps a lot. There's other reasons why it's good to have multiple people. You get different skill sets, you get different viewpoints, but that peer pressure is one of the things. If you go to, we have a website called sprintstories.com where just people have written posts about sprints that they've run, and there's one up there, maybe even a couple of people who have run sprints on their own. And I occasionally hear those stories when it's one person, but I think it's very difficult. So we really think that, if you've got the peer pressure starts to kick in, you've got different perspectives. Really, it's at like 3, 4, where you start to hit critical mass and you really start to have some different, some competition when you get to making a decision about different ideas. And 5 to 7 is kind of the ideal size.
Great. Well, you're welcome to the UK if you want to come. So
awesome. Thank you.
And James, thanks for the reminder. In your membership portal, there is an hour-long webinar that I did with Jake that you can share with your employees, unless they're watching on A360 Digital, in which case they're seeing it right now. Jose.
Thank you. Yes, what happens if you decide on one idea and find out that you have a very diverse set of users that can be your customers, and you want to test it? How do you go about finding your right target market? Do you use online surveys like SurveyMonkey in order to complement it, or?
Yeah, so there's a couple parts to that answer. First, we think it's really important that the 5 customers on Friday all fit the same profile. So if there's 3 different customer profiles or 3 different groups that you could be targeting, you have to do them one at a time, because with only 5 interviews, you need them to all be kind of the same type of customer in order to see those patterns.
Could you repeat Friday over and over and over again with different customer groups?
Yeah, you totally could.
So 5 of group A, 5 of group B, 5 of group C, and then actually find out not only what does each group like, but which group is actually your real customer, perhaps.
Yeah. Some of the most successful teams that we've worked with, they bring really, really strong kind of analytical and quantitative understanding of their customers into the first day of the sprint, and they'll give us an hour-long presentation on segmenting their customers and things like we've found that new users who complete these actions within the first 5 days are more likely to be there a year later, and the types of things that a really good data science team can figure out. So we'll use that kind of information to then decide, of all these different customers, based on everything we know about them, which group is the one that represents that biggest risk or that biggest opportunity, and then we'll choose that target customer as part of our target on our map on Monday.
Thank you. Apologies, we have time for 2 more questions. Colin.
Thanks very much for what you've offered in your book. It's great. 2 questions. Firstly, have you ever done it running a virtual team, so not a physically co-located team? And second question is, where have you seen this and how does it embed in a broader stage gate or agile product development process?
So talk about the first part. Doing it remotely is hard, but doable. I just wrote a blog post about this because for a long time I've said, really don't bother trying. It's quite painful to do it remotely. And it's true that a lot of the magic comes from being in the same room. Our brains are so much better adapted to remembering information that's physically on the walls around us to the face-to-face interactions we have with people. And I've found that when we have done them virtually, when I've been on video trying to track a team, that it's fatiguing for my brain just to try to keep track of where all the people are, what's going on in the room. That said, there are some tools you can do, and for some teams it's just not practical to get together in the same place and do a sprint. So if you go to GV Library, that's where you'd find that post about some of the tricks and tactics that we found work well.
And the answer to your other question is short. Agile development is a production process. The sprint is a design process. So do your sprints, figure out what you're doing, and then flip it over into an agile development process to actually make it happen.
We see the design sprint as being agnostic to whatever product development process a team runs. So it can work great with Agile, it can work great with whatever else a team does, but the key part is to know where you're going before you start going.
Great, thank you. Ken, our last question here, pal.
Great. Well, first of all, thanks, guys. It's been fantastic. So I create passion-based networks that are primarily on television, but then also across over the top and social. And I have a network called Ovation. This question is going to be about Tennis Channel. So Tennis Channel, which is what it sounds like. I don't need to describe it too much. That's why it's well named. But we're at a watershed moment where we've gone from 30 to 60 million paid monthly subscribers on television, big over the top. But the real opportunity now in boiling the ocean and bringing television back, tennis back to the United States, which 95% of it wasn't available for the last 30 years, is social. And so there's a moment here where I want to test two new separate product lines that are social that will back into air and we can use on the air. One would be fan-generated content. You've got the tribes out there. You've got teams and clubs and families and games and couples, and people are orient their lives around these groups, and them bringing the content to us. Vin DeBona in this town made hundreds of millions of dollars on a show called America's Funniest Home Videos, but this is a category that really brings people together. And then the second is products and services, whether it's health-oriented stuff, because we've got obviously an extraordinarily forward-thinking, healthy audience, or just pure instruction. And you can imagine, obviously, the great demand for like an instructional subscription service where we can get the best players in the world to do that. So I want to test both those quickly because these things are going to happen, and this just seems like a perfect method to empower the team to get on it.
I agree.
Awesome.
Any thoughts? Any tips from your?
Send Jake an email.
The nice thing about those two ideas is that they're not directly competing. I'm sure there's overlaps and whatever, but you could potentially put those both into one prototype. So you could sort of set up a scenario where somebody is watching the Tennis Channel and there's a little promotion in the corner that directs them to a website, which then allows them to download something. And you could kind of take somebody through the scenario that exposes them to the footprint of everything you're thinking about, and you could see where they light up. You can see where they get excited, and then you could take that information and evaluate it from a business perspective and make a decision.
That's great.
And email Jake.
And I already did that long ago. All right, well, thanks. Appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in thanking these two amazing individuals.
Thanks again, Peter.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, it's really fun.
And it's hello@jakeknapp.com, right?
That's right, yeah.
All right. So we're about to go to a break. I need you for 2 more minutes. Please, my takeaways here, there is always a way to disrupt and improve your company. It just is a matter of fact. And the question is, how passionate are you about your company? And then, are you trying to figure that out before someone else does? If you're making a great margin and are in a great business, there is 100 entrepreneurs trying to digitize, disrupt, democratize, dematerialize what you're doing. Experimentation, I can't say this enough, and perhaps our next guest, when we come back from the break, Jeff Holden will, maybe if you want questions on that, talk about experimentation, maybe the experimentation that Uber is doing right now. It's the lifeblood of the most successful companies. The old way, old school is, I have an idea, and I tell my team, go and do this idea. That is just, you're blind to the opportunities in that regard. Experimentation is easier than ever. And bake experimentation process into your company's culture. I actually measure every month one of our scorecards, one of our 8 scorecard items up there with revenue is the number of experiments we're doing every month. I measure the number of experiments we're doing every month. And we have a segment of our day-long session, which is people reporting out on the experiments they did, the results, and the experiments they're planning next month. It is my mantra, experimentation, 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 period. So, 555 is going to be great. Please try it. It's going to give you new products and services. And it's about a vibrant and collaborative mindset of your organization.